Good morning from under a bridge. Hey, Gabe,
What?
guess what?
What?
We're under a bridge.
Okay.
We're under a bridge down on Potomac Park. I don't see any trolls down under this bridge. But it's a beautiful morning.
Yeah, because all the trolls went extinct after the War of 1812, stupid.
All the trolls went extinct after the War of 1812.
Yeah.
Alright, if you say so. But we're walking on down toward the Tidal Basin, beginning our day here in Washington, D.C. As of time of filming, it is not cherry blossom season, so we're not going to see. We're not going to see the beautiful pinks of the cherry blossoms. Nice green trees, though. Keep in mind that the Tidal Basin is undergoing renovations right now, getting ready for next summer, getting ready for next year, 2026, which is going to be the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, of American independence from Britain. Now, time for my little soapbox that I'm sure you guys may have heard a few times, but not really the 250th anniversary of our nation. That would be with the Constitution from 1789. From 1776 to 1789, it was more like 13 independent nations working together under a joint treaty. But going on. There's Mr. George Mason. We'll see him in a little bit. But as you'll see, the construction over here on the Tidal Basin, that was all that started last summer, last May, last June, I want to say, after the cherry blossoms were done, after cherry blossom season last year in 2024. They are fixing the Tidal Basin and the seawall because over the time, the seawall kind of sinks a little bit, and then the Tidal Basin rises up, creates a lot of flooding. Some of the brackish waters that would fill on in starts killing off some of those lovely cherry blossom trees. Cherry blossoms, a gift from the Japanese. I think we'll stop by one of those markers that commemorates the gift of friendship between the Japanese and American nations. But it is a beautiful day. Now, throughout the day, we'll notice the line between Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Capitol building down through the National Mall, and the monuments, the memorials, the city itself is laid out in a nice grid section. And a lot of times the Jefferson Memorial gets, I don't know what the word is, not forgotten. Everybody knows it's here, but it's not like right next to those. But it is in a cross section between the White House and the Jefferson Memorial from the north and the south of the Washington Mall, which is oriented east to west. You got the beautiful Tidal Basin in the middle, so you got this body of water that's not quite as symmetrical as the reflecting pool on the east-west orientation between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. It's a nice little refreshment stand right over here by the Jefferson Memorial. At this time of day, it is
Squirrels.
not open. Except squirrels will always try to find a treat. Credit to Gabe for pointing that out. Nice manicured lawn. But I do fully expect all of this construction over here. What they're going to be again fixing the sidewalks. A lot of that would flood, make things difficult for visitors who would be taking lovely strolls around the Tidal Basin, who would then trample around some of the roots of the cherry blossom trees as well, damaging them. R.I.P. Stumpy. We took one last visit to Stumpy in our last visit down here. But they got to secure the seawall, secure the Tidal Basin, make it wider, make the walkways wider, and more accessible, and ultimately more beautiful. Right now, we got these lovely, lovely black fences here. But Benjamin Franklin once said, there are two things that are constant in life. One is death, and the other is taxes. I think he's wrong. I think there's three: death, taxes, and change. Which I guess is implied in his statement that there are only two things that are constant, which means that everything else is full of change. But for those of us who'd like to have those things spelled out, we'll say death, taxes, and change. There's Tommy J. Inside his rotunda. Glorious columns. I love this memorial. It's one of the prettiest ones I've ever seen anywhere.
That up there is a fine, upstanding black man.
For those of you who are not understanding the reference of Thomas Jefferson being a fine, upstanding black man,
zero.
that would be from Hamilton.
I wonder where his Miku binder is.
The Jefferson Memorial. Now, I actually just noticed this for the very, very, very first time right now. So, bear with me for not knowing precisely what this is. But, if we look right up top, there's a little, I can't tell if that's Jefferson himself up there. See if I can zoom in any further. I can't. That may be George Washington. Yeah, it very well may be. I see Ben Franklin over on the left. But a group of our founders right there. We'll go up the steps and visit Mr. Jefferson. Like all of our founders, they have flaws, issues, problems. But we can't let those flaws overstate the greatness that they've done. We also can't let the greatness that they've done overstate their flaws and their mistakes. Some of those things are culturally based. I would say that there are some universal morals, although we may not always know where those differences lie between time and time and culture and culture. But here is Mr. Thomas Jefferson.
Man, what did he miss?
Born 1743, died 1826. He died as an airplane's about to go right past. Okay, or maybe not.
Yeah.
He died 1826, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of our independence. Now, with nobody else in here right now, it's just us. I don't know how well on the stream you can hear it, but this rotunda just echoes my voice, echoes the voices of everybody here. So, if you are visiting, you will notice that it can get quite loud in here of everybody else's conversations, everybody else's discussions. So for those of you who may have some noise-related sensory issues, just keep that in mind. But Thomas Jefferson died 1826, July 4th, 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence that he wrote. He died the very same day as his good friend and political rival, John Adams, the second president of the United States. Inside some of his most famous quotes, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Some true words may never have been spoken." You'll see references to God many times through here. Thomas Jefferson was not a Christian man, per se. That time, with his philosophical beliefs, he was, I would probably say, much more of a deist. Back in the 1700s, early 1800s, Enlightenment thinkers, there was this idea still that, God existed. But at the same time, he let his creation do as it would. And he just kind of let things roll and didn't interfere much in the roles of man. And that goes into the Enlightenment thinking of the elevation of man to where a lot of these founding ideals would come from, that the ideal man, the ideal politician, would not seek out glory and fame for his own good, but would seek out glory really for the people, or really for the state in and of itself. Again, some flawed ideas that would come into play, because, again, as we've seen through history time and time again, that doesn't always come about. Some idealism that loses a little bit of its luster there through reality, through history. But it was those ideals that laid the groundwork for this nation, this experiment to attempt to do as it did. Peacefully transfer power without military intervention, without military coups, without kingship, to allow the people to decide how they would want to govern themselves. But anyway, that the vast majority of our founders generally believed that same way. Now, they had differences of opinion as to how that should function in reality. There were some who decided that all of the power should go to the people. There were some that felt that the people needed some guidance. And from those differences over time, those differences have grown. They've become political parties over time, different ideologies, different parties switch ideologies based on trends in history, trends in society, so on and so forth. But I love the columns here. I love these beautiful marble steps leading up. And Thomas Jefferson just standing over there, looking out over the Tidal Basin to the monument of George Washington.
I'm confused. Where's his Miku binder at now?
Thomas Jefferson, third president of the United States. He served 1801 to 1809. Back then, inauguration days were in March as opposed to early January, as opposed to January 20th. So he was elected in the election of 1800. Quite a contentious election, actually. We're going to head on over toward our next memorial. A lot of times the Jefferson Memorial is the prominently featured memorial here by the Tidal Basin. It is the largest one, but it is by far not the only one. And we'll touch base on those. But the Jefferson Memorial, or I'm sorry, Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, he the contentious election that brought him in. So he, George Washington, the first president, did not believe that political parties would be healthy for the nation. He wanted everyone to remain united. But in his effort to do that as he led, he had people from different opinions on his cabinet. So his advisors included people such as Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, who, the two of them, disagreed on many, many issues. Interestingly, Alexander Hamilton, who wrote a large portion of the Federalist Papers, which was a list of letters, a group of letters compiled together that were published, designed over time to convince the people to ratify the U.S. Constitution.
Defend the document to the public.
Yeah, to defend the document to the public. Our Hamilton fan over here, Gabe. Thank you. But it was true. But he worked together with James Madison. Now, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton differed on many, many, many things as well. But they worked together to defend the document, to persuade the people to be convinced to ratify the Constitution from different perspectives. So James Madison was a protege of Thomas Jefferson, who worked as Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State during Jefferson's presidency. Back then, it was typically the Secretary of State that would be kind of that, I'm the next one in line to serve as president, as opposed to the vice president. Now, the Constitution did have the vice president would would take up the role of the presidency in the event in the event of death or succession or something along those lines. But in terms of who had more political clout, who was groomed, if you would, to be the next president, that would be the person who was in Secretary of State. That was the person who was typically the head diplomat of the State Department and working with other nations and things along those lines. Now, all of that being said, in Washington was president, he stepped down. John Adams became the next president. He was president for one term. John Adams had defeated Thomas Jefferson for president. Then Jefferson ran and soundly defeated John Adams. But back then, there was not like the ticket that we know now where someone is running for vice president. So the way the Constitution was written was that whoever had the most votes for president would be president. Whoever had the second most votes would be vice president. So that would be a kind of another check with the checks and balances, so that the second most popular person would be vice president in case something happened to the president. Then that person at least would step into the office. Now, as it turns out, so Washington didn't want political parties, but then over time, these different groups of people who had their views decided that they would work together. So Aaron Burr, yes, that Aaron Burr, he was Jefferson's pick to be the vice president, and it was assumed that they would that one particular state is going to reconnect. Oh. There we go. We've reconnected again. So I don't know how this is or when this is going to reconnect. I really don't know what the connection issues are around this way, but we'll continue as we go. So anyway, in the election of 1800, Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson were tied, and with a tie vote, it goes to the delegates from the House of Representatives to determine who would be the president. Aaron Burr at that point actively began campaigning to those delegates for his vote, which, according to the founding ideals, as we just talked about, was not something that was looked highly upon. So, all that being said, Aaron Burr eventually lost. Alexander Hamilton did in fact endorse Thomas Jefferson, his enemy, because he felt that at least Thomas Jefferson had ideals and morals where he felt that Aaron Burr did not. Aaron Burr being much more of what would be similar to today's politicians. Just saying what he would want to say to get the votes, kind of bouncing between one party and another based on how he felt it would be. So, all that being said, Jefferson won the election of 1800, was responsible for the Louisiana Purchase, and at that point doubling the size of American land acquisition. Now, it was just from European powers who would have those claims. He didn't engage in wars with native tribes or anything along those lines to force them out or anything along those lines. But Thomas Jefferson, that was him. Not far at all, we come across George Mason. George Mason, often considered a forgotten founder. George Mason from Virginia, just as Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and James Madison were. George Mason, here under this, is this a portico? I don't know. Let me know. What's the official term of the architectural design over here with the? Is it lattice work up top? Help me out. Let me know. But he was very instrumental in communicating for morality, power being vested in, derived from the people, government to be instituted for the common benefit of the people. But all of that being said, he did not ratify the U.S. Constitution. He felt that the Constitution itself, which implicitly amendments, eventually you would see amendments 9 and 10, granting all power that's not explicitly given to the federal government back to the states and back to the people, allowing the people to be free. However, those amendments were part of the Bill of Rights, which were not included in the original Constitution. So he did not ratify the Constitution in 1789 because he felt it was inadequate in protecting the rights of the people. Again, one of those disagreements where those such as Hamilton or even Jefferson felt that the people should have their rights, and this expressly states these are the rights given to the government. George Mason believed that people can be flawed and government can be flawed, and they could try to take away some of those rights, and so he wanted extra protections. So based on all of that, James Madison went to work with creating the Bill of Rights, which eventually was passed shortly after the Constitution. Those first 10 amendments to the Constitution. But George Mason passed away before those amendments and the Bill of Rights were ratified.
However, George Mason lives on in the world of Winter Garden International with the George Mason Show. The indoor drum line show. The George Mason Show.
The George Mason Show, huh?
Yeah, you've seen it.
Okay.
Literally big.
A little humid this morning. It's not terrible. That airplane's coming straight on in. They're going to fly into DCA, Reagan, Washington National. American Airlines. Follow along the Tidal Basin. You get some lovely views. Blocked by a tree. There you go. That's the Jefferson Memorial right there. Gorgeous in the springtime when all of these leaves are pink and white. Of course, it'll also be crowded down through this way with visitors checking out the pink and cherry blossoms. So I'd always recommend early in the morning. Yeah, you'll get your photographers trying to get that perfect sunrise view. But most of the tourists will come in a little bit later.
Actually, I don't know. What is this? Enlighten me. That wall. The broken wall.
Well, that, good sir, is construction.
Oh. Well, no. Look. You know. Right.
So, right here, actually, there's bridge work. They are rebuilding the seawalls. And all this bridge work over here. Right through here. So our path around the tidal basin, our viewing may be obscured with all the construction. Some of these paths may require some route changing from time to time. We may come across a part that's blocked and may have to backtrack. I don't know, but we'll see. We'll find out. For those of you who are with us, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming on by on this beautiful day. If you have any questions, hopefully I can get to them if I can see them. This is my very first actual YouTube live stream, so we'll see. But if I don't see them now, then I'll be sure to answer them the best I can after the fact. And as we come across, we hear the sounds of rushing water. I don't know how well you can hear them, but I hear them.
Okay, Dad, you not want to touch the chat button there?
There we go. Now we transport ourselves a little bit through time. We've gone from the founding era of Thomas Jefferson and George Mason. And now we transport ourselves to the first half of the 20th century. Memorial to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. President from 1933 to 1945. That's right, that is 12 years. Instead of 8, which is the maximum now. That maximum was put in place because of FDR.
Actually, the maximum is 10. Like, the absolute maximum is 10.
Yes, through various aspects of what the Constitution would be. But in terms of the maximum of being elected with 4-year terms. And here's the sound of rushing water. Now, FDR believed in 4 fundamental freedoms: the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. Speech and worship obviously rolled into the First Amendment. Freedom and want, freedom from fear, those are tied into, the Great Depression. Freedom from abject, absolute poverty. Now, prior to his New Deal and his ideas to create a safety net for the American people, the general idea was that the free market would allow for those types of things, and there would be great highs and there would be great lows, but the great lows would be very, very short. For the most part, that was true, but it still affected a great amount of people. But this is pretty. I could just sit here. This here is Eleanor, the first American delegate to the United Nations. The relationship between FDR and his wife Eleanor was quite interesting. The FDR Memorial goes through various parts of his presidency, his various terms. So it's a lengthy one to walk through. There's a lot of square footage involved in this memorial compared to many of the others. But he was elected during the Great Depression and worked to instill confidence and hope in the people, where people could come together, work for each other, and work with each other. Now, the way that we were coming through, you go through these stations, the various different terms. If you ever have the opportunity to go up near Hyde Park, New York, I would highly recommend a visit to the FDR. Spring Hill is the name of the estate where Franklin grew up and where he lived. His home there on the Hudson River. And there's a National Park Service site there. The Franklin Roosevelt Library, Presidential Library, is there. There's also a National Park Service site for Eleanor Roosevelt herself as well, separate from Franklin's legacy. And frankly, that was how they worked together. They early on there was distrust due to infidelities on Franklin's part. And rather than getting a divorce, they figured they could work together as partners and colleagues politically, as Eleanor being attached to Franklin's name would give some more clout to Eleanor, even though her work itself would not require that clout. Just the way that the world was, the way that society was, they figured they could both accomplish their joint goals, one politically and one socially. As I said, this goes on for a little bit. Each one representing the 4 terms of Franklin Roosevelt. So I said 12 years for FDR, 4 terms, a term being 4 years. Well, the math doesn't add up. Well, the math does add up because he was elected for a 4th term, but then died in office.
Sorry.
He died in office shortly into that 4th term, in the midst of World War II, leaving Harry Truman, his vice president, to become the next president and make those difficult decisions as to how to end World War II with the atomic bomb ready. Should it be used against Japan or should it not be used against Japan, causing mass civilian deaths compared to the thousands and thousands and thousands of deaths taking place during the war through increased kamikaze attacks. But as we're doing our walkthrough, we're kind of going through this memorial backwards. Here, faces, imprints of individuals affected by the Great Depression, and then FDR's commitment to creating the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was giving jobs to individuals. And those jobs would go to improve public parks, state parks, what would be national parks, public lands, basically giving them jobs, the government to pay them so they would have jobs and funds to go back home, so that they wouldn't necessarily have to wait in these bread lines. You can always take a somber moment to think about what life was like during the Great Depression. Some of us have stories from our grandparents or great-grandparents or great-greats, depending on their ages, of what life may have been like then. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of what made him a great leader, regardless of one's ideas about politics, what made him a great leader were these fireside chats that he would have, using radio, using the technology of radio to talk directly to the American people, trying to instill hope about, hey, we know this is not easy, but we can get through this together. What the government was trying to do to try to create something a little bit better for the American people. Now, what FDR did, and when he created these types of programs, it fundamentally altered how the American economy would function in the free market. So again, and one thing about this memorial is all of the water features. They are constant and they are everywhere. But it altered the American economy, which was basically purely free market, and there would be steep recessions, steep depressions, but they would be short-lived. His policies extended the depression longer than any other depression that had been going on before. However, it created a safety net to avoid as deep depressions as there could be, to kind of limit the lows of how low a low can go. They may take a little bit longer, but they're limited as to how deep and how hard they can go. And his fireside chats were important because they sought to underline this message that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. We don't need to be afraid. We can get through this, and fear will only drive us deeper into our own personal depression. And fear can lead to a lot of difficult things. Now, this isn't a political statement. This isn't a historical statement, although it has a lot of historical basis. So the nerd in me is going to come out, the Star Wars nerd, because fear does in fact oftentimes lead to anger. And anger can lead to hate. And hate, with its fear, accompanied often by the pain that fear is directly entwined with, that hate can lead to suffering. Yes, those are wise words of Master Yoda. But they apply. They apply very much. 1 in 4 Americans were out of work. And so many more worked hard to find food. The American people, obviously, dealing with the collapse of the economic system, saw his messages of hope for that New Deal for the American people as the way, as they saw FDR as the answer. And FDR, no matter what one thinks about his political policies or whatnot, it cannot be denied that he is one of the greatest leaders of the American people that this country has ever known. From leading the people through the economic turmoils of the Great Depression, and then although wanting to keep America out of World War II because America had its own economic issues struggling with, leading the nation and leading the world through World War II after the attack by the Japanese on Pearl Harbor. Yet he did all of this while suffering from polio, leaving him confined to a wheelchair. But he fought through that to occasionally stand as was needed, to hide the legs behind the desk at the Oval Office in the White House, to give the people hope, even though he struggled through. So now we can look back and we can see his pain, his sufferings, and his ability to overcome them, his resilience, his determination to overcome them, to become one of the greatest leaders that this nation has ever known. So as I said, we're going through this a little bit backwards just because we were starting at the Jefferson Memorial. But this is his prologue about his story. And it takes you through his terms, through all of those water features. He actually contracted his polio in New Brunswick, Canada. At the Campobello Resort Cottage, the Roosevelt Cottage in Campobello, right, an island right between Maine and New Brunswick, Canada. If you ever have an opportunity to go up there, I'd encourage it. Campobello Island's a beautiful place. Beautiful place. He took multiple trips to Campobello. And you could take a tour and learn about the Roosevelt family taking trips up there. Eleanor calling out to the kids with a big giant cone shape that it's dinner time. But after he contracted polio, when he was, I want to say 21, he was in his early 20s when he contracted polio. He was only able to take just a few more trips there. And as we'll see, not all of the memorials here around the Tidal Basin or the National Mall proper are presidents. Well, George Mason obviously was never a president. Every now and then when you get these streams or videos of me, you come across something that's just a little interesting. The humidity, the steam rising up from the mulch. Anywho's.
Squirrel.
Squirrel! Squirrel! Yeah, lots of squirrels. Nice squirrel. Squirrel right on a trash can. I don't know if you can... is he diving in? Is he going to jump out? Don't... Well, he's diving in, holding on with just a tiny foot. So from when we started, this is just a casual stroll, and I'm going to keep you a little bit of apprised. So we walked right around up to here. And we've walked through here along the Tidal Basin. So we have this. We have all of the mall to go. So the mall can be very, very, very sneaky big. Those of you coming for the very first time and want to explore everything, I would highly recommend that you consider yourself more than a day. Take your time. Bring your water. Take your time. So all of these seawalls, they're working at restoring those and adjusting those and rebuilding those. Right now, those are off limits. We have these outer paths that we can go on. You can see that goes right up to the water. The tidal basin's not very deep in and of itself. So if somebody were to fall in, it wouldn't be immensely problematic. I don't think there would be any major risk of loss of life, but still, it needs to be widened for increased foot traffic. And just the way the soil is over time, it just starts to sink. Martin Luther King Jr. We shall overcome, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. A preacher who took his Christian convictions to advance the morality of those Christian convictions toward the public good, to recognize the moral wrongs that some freedoms can allow people to freely act morally wrong. So while freedom is a moral goodness, people still have a responsibility to act morally, despite their freedom to act immorally. And out of the mountain of despair comes a stone of hope. And from this stone of hope stands Martin Luther King, staring directly at Thomas Jefferson across the Tidal Basin. Because it was Thomas Jefferson himself that said all men are created equal. And Martin Luther King was staring down at Thomas Jefferson as those words were not being applied to all men, to all people in the United States. Slavery had been abolished. African Americans were citizens, but they were being denied some of those basic rights by individual states and by individual business owners who had those rights. But again, when there are conflicts of rights, which rights are more fundamental than others amongst those fundamental inalienable rights? And that's something that I think American history, we look back at American history and we can see these struggles because the Constitution gives freedom. The Constitution has original intent, and original intent absolutely must be applied in our interpretation of the Constitution. But it also must be remembered that original intent involved individuals in their time and what they thought was morally acceptable or not in their time. And when people believe something is morally acceptable or not in their time, we can't necessarily instill our understanding back in time, but we can understand that maybe they missed some things because they were limited in their visions. So those are just some of those conversations that I think these memorials bring about as we look at our issues that we have today, whatever those issues may be, whatever's important to you, whatever's important to the political party or the group followings that you have, is what does history say? And what does all of history say? I'm not sure what kind of tree this is. I like the flowers. It's pretty. As we walk through Martin Luther King. Sadly shot down, assassinated. Another thing about history, and about, frankly, any topic, it doesn't matter if it's history, if it's science, if it's sociology, psychology, it frankly really doesn't matter, but there is so much volume of things to learn and to read, but you can never get to all of it. And unfortunately for me, so far, that's one of the things that I have not yet fully been able to get to yet, is Martin Luther King's writings, his speeches. It's just so powerful. His letters from a Birmingham jail. I've read snippets of them, and just from those snippets to be able to know how powerful they are. But I've just not been able to get to all of those and to get to all of his writings. But it is fitting. This is one of those newer memorials. It's fitting that it stands right here, right across from the Jefferson Memorial, staring Thomas Jefferson in the eye, saying, yes, all men are created equal. We are walking right along the Tidal Basin. And again, during cherry blossom season, these cherry blossoms right up on the water, the reflections of the water coming back, very pretty, going underneath. And as they fix these seawalls, some of these cherry blossom trees sadly are going to have to go, because you can look at the root structures, just how the ground has been manipulated. They'll salvage as many of them as they can, and obviously plant more. But as we know, the 1960s were a period of civil unrest, and Martin Luther King Jr.'s death is just another tragedy in his calling out about the racism inherent in America and what that time period was like, and fear. The actions of assassins are often based on fear of that other person's message, fear of that other person's actions, and what that can bring about. Anger, pain, hatred, suffering. But the message of Martin Luther King Jr. did not die with him. It lived on. And often that's the case. If a message is good and a message is strong and a message is right or has many semblances of rightness in it, then the message will live on. Others taking up that mantle in his name. Mantles of justice, mantles of goodness. Sometimes you got to duck your head underneath some of these branches. I see geese. Do you all see geese? We'll get there. We'll see them. Now I'd like to know, how many of these are a family, and how many of these are just buddies that fly around with and swim around with each other? I don't know. I'm not a goose expert in terms of goose sociology. But here at the Tidal Basin, there are benches, and you can just sit and watch the geese and the ducks. Obviously, a lot of political movies, or movies with political bases or implications, can be filmed in and around or take place in and around. So if you're going to visit some of these areas, you can consider maybe where some of your favorite movies were. Down here, the Tidal Basin area. The National Mall. A lot of these popular places. National Treasure 2, Book of Secrets. Agent Sadusky asked Nicolas Cage's character Benjamin Franklin Gates if he likes ducks. Heading on down to feed some ducks because he wanted to talk to him as a friend and not as an FBI agent. It's about the president's secret book, the Book of Secrets. Anyway, I don't know if there is one or if isn't one. I wouldn't be surprised if there is one, but I'm not necessarily a conspiracy theorist kind of guy. Lovely pedestrian bridge. Just over the Tidal Basin. So technically, the Tidal Basin is not the National Mall. And that's part of the confusion that people would have sometimes about the Jefferson Memorial and the National Mall. It's not on there, all of that sort of thing. But it's there. Beautiful, pretty. Stands in line through the midpoint of the National Mall to the White House, the presidential mansion. The Washington Monument, you would think, would be the center point. It's not. I think it was designed to be, but just construction and architecture, engineering required something just slightly different. And that's just another idea about how in life, sometimes you have wonderful ideas. Sometimes you can engineer those ideas the way you want. Sometimes you have to live with a reality that's just a little bit different. Now, before we head off to the mall proper, we have one little stop here on the Tidal Basin. regularly. You can take paddle boats and kayaks onto the Tidal Basin, enjoy the water. Even just walking right now, we can feel how the seawall is definitely needing repairs. Every now and then, you got the smell of fish. And dead fish. Hello, friend. Hello. Enjoying some ducks. Just strolling around. Nice, peaceful day. Again, thank you for coming along with us. We appreciate it. This area is pretty flat, but some of these you'll notice some of the sidewalk parts up and down definitely need some love and refurbishment, and that's what they're doing. It's not nearly as bad over here as it is over on the other side by FDR. This is a little high up already, but even as we come up here, you're going to notice the trip hazards. So just be mindful and just be careful. We got paddle boats right up here. That's one thing I've never done. I've never paddle boated on the kayaked or canoed or anything on the Tidal Basin. But given the right day, the right weather, that would be something that I might want to do, just to enjoy some peace and tranquility out in the water. As I hinted at before, these places are surprisingly big. Make sure you bring your walking shoes, good walking shoes. I mean, it could be sandals, whatever you're comfortable walking shoes. I definitely was not going to be wearing my Hey Dudes today. Those are comfortable, but I can't walk with them, not with my feet. Paddle boats and canoes. Make sure not to smack your head on a low-hanging branch like that. Oh, the low-hanging branch is way out there. There it is. I see it. Now this parking area right around here is gated to a certain extent. So yeah, there's sidewalk, but here on a Sunday morning, it's not too bad. We're gonna walk back through this way. Head on up toward the National Mall. Now, as we head up there, we're gonna start at the midpoint, near the midpoint of the National Mall. And then we're going to head west through the monuments, through most of the monuments. Now, with that, you will definitely see how big the mall itself actually is. We're going to come across some lesser known monuments. Hit some of those in some video before, but get a little up close with some. All of this park ground, even just on the other side, so nice places for a picnic. Bring the dog, go for a run, a jog, a walk. Just enjoy peace, which is fitting, yet also ironic, because here we are in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. A city that is identified and equated almost with politics, with today's climate nationally and globally being the divisiveness of politics. Bringing out fear on both sides. Bringing about policies that other people feel are harmful, other people feel are great, other people feel that other people are anti-American because their policy is not the same as the other policy. In that climate, to be able to try to escape that mentality, to bring a little bit of peace to your own humanness by connecting with some nature and just getting a deep breath of fresh air. It's a little hard to see. I don't know if you guys can see it. Right back through there is the White House. As I said, a center line from the White House to the Jefferson Memorial right over there. And the Washington Monument is just slightly off that center line. But there is at least one marker right over there that supposedly marks the center line. It's called the Jefferson Pier, the Jefferson Pier Stone, which was designed to mark that center point for where he felt that the Washington, a memorial to Washington should go. But surveys are off for a little bit. And whether you mark it from the corner of a building or you mark it from the center of the building, you know, those types of discrepancies come about. But walking through with us, I'm glad that so far we didn't come across any rain. There was a possibility this morning of some thunderstorms, so we brought rain jackets. But then, when we came on down here this morning to join you all, what did we leave behind? The rain jackets. So, then again, I didn't make that as a priority early this morning. I did double check the weather, and then rain and thunderstorms aren't supposed to roll in until after 12 or 12:30 or so, and we'll be done before then. Always make sure that you watch where you're going. As much as everybody knows, or everybody wants to walk around the National Mall, the Tidal Basin, there are roads and streets and vehicular traffic that intersects even some of the more popular areas. So just be mindful. Come on up this way. We're going to go away from the Washington Monument. That is slightly to the west of the midpoint. And we're going to go to the east of the midpoint. And again, we come across a little map that shows us where we are. We are right here. Washington Monument. Bisect there. We're going to hit this section right over here. So, let's come along. A lot of green space here around the mall. A lot of grass. A lot of grass, depending on the time of the year. So you always want to make sure that you have your mindset set. So if you are going to be coming around cherry blossom season, that's usually the earlier part of that spring. So that's going to be in between mid-March to mid-April, depending on how the calendar goes. And a lot of the green space here is going to still be perhaps left over from winter. Sorry, I had to make an adjustment there. So some of that green space may still be dry, if you would. The grass may be worn, may not be fully grown in yet. In the later summer, so August, could have drought conditions, could be dried up as well. But we're going to be heading on over toward the World War II Memorial. But before we do, We got a brief little stop right up here. Someone who said, "I have not yet begun to fight." Commodore John Paul Jones. Now, I almost said James Earl Jones. James Earl Jones was not a Commodore in the U.S. Navy. Actually, John Paul Jones was he was Scottish. He was Scottish, and he took up the American cause, and he helped the naval efforts during the American Revolution, particularly as the French were aiding the Americans with naval support, shipping lanes, things along those lines. He was one of those that was fighting against the British to help support the Americans. One of America's first naval heroes. And as I said, always be mindful if you're going to be crossing the street. So, but there he is. He doesn't get a whole lot of foot traffic. Everyone tends to walk this way. And that is precisely where we're going to go after I take this pit stop. Give him a little credit for where he's due. Because he doesn't get as much love. He's not often seen as one of the greatest American figures, but truly does help to compel foreign man of war to strike the colors to the stars and stripes. John Paul Jones. Now, we're going to head on over to the World War II Memorial. And as we head over, this is, I already said the Jefferson Memorial, I think is one of my favorite, one of the most beautiful memorials. And it is. The World War II Memorial, it gives it a run for its money. Now, maybe it's just my vantage point, but I don't see the fountains running right now. Maybe they are and I can't see them. Maybe they are off. Maybe they're only on certain times of the day. It is, it's not even 9 o'clock yet. Now, those fountains are not running. Whether that's a water conservation, a financial conservation, I'm not sure. But when the fountains are running, this thing is absolutely gorgeous. But this was commissioned and installed during the George W. Bush administration. And it really does give a lot of honor to what's often known as the greatest generation, of just people who are giving of themselves. Yes, there was draft, but giving of themselves for the freedom of other people. So this memorial is divided into the Atlantic and the Pacific fronts. Atlantic on the north side, Pacific on the south side, since this is running in a north-south orientation. And along the side, We have bas reliefs depicting particular portions of the war effort that is familiar to the soldiers in that particular area. Now, some of these other water features are running. The main fountains in the center are not, but some of these waterfalls are running. We have these bas reliefs here on the Atlantic side. We have similar bas reliefs over on the Pacific side. And the Atlantic Theater here has quotes by Eisenhower. It has locations where the troops and battalions fought to liberate France, to penetrate toward Germany, and to end the war on the European front. General Eisenhower's D-Day quote, that you were about to embark on the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months, and the eyes of the world are upon you. Demonstrating his confidence in the courage of the American troops that will be infiltrating an amphibious assault onto the beaches of Normandy. North Africa, Southern Europe, Western Europe, and Central Europe, all the way through, leading all of the various battles, the different locations that Americans had fought. Air war, amphibious wars, through North Africa and Italy, all the way in to Germany. Now along the side as well, these pillars, the recent pillars of the various states and American territories that provided troops along the way, including American troops from Alaska, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and the Virgin Islands. The Philippines were American still at that point, acquired along with Puerto Rico and Guam through the Spanish-American War. This doesn't just honor the American troops, it honors the troops of our allies as well. Harry Truman noting that the heroism was not just our troops, it was the armed forces of the other nations as well. Not just an American effort, but truly an allied effort. The gold stars, 4,048 stars. And it's here that we mark the price of freedom. The 4,048 stars, each star representing, I believe, 100 men who died in battle, on the battlefield, fighting for American freedom, fighting for European freedom against the tyranny of Nazi Germany, fighting for Asian freedom against the tyranny of the Japanese Empire. But Harry Truman didn't just credit also the Allies. He credited the men and women that were not only in the service but also at home, who had to keep the American economy going while so many soldiers were at war overseas. Can you imagine what was necessary to keep the home front running, with so many individuals now taken away from their jobs and sent overseas to fight? How would those companies, those corporations, continue to maintain their ability to not only create their own products and services, but to keep employed the people who would need to keep their jobs, to keep their income at home? Very, very easy, if you think about it, to think about how World War II could have plunged America back into the Great Depression that we had just sought to come out of. The war machinery obviously helped. A lot of companies, a lot of communities helped to the war effort. Volunteerism. This was a group of people. That's another reason why it's called the Greatest Generation. A group of people that worked together to help the country. Yes, America was attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, but it was not. There was no massive invasion. There was not a direct threat to the conquering of the United States by Germany or by Japan. But the Americans, as a people, came together. And it all started right here at Pearl Harbor. So this is a very, very pretty memorial. And as I said, it honors so many aspects of the war, so many aspects of the war effort, the experiences of the people, the experiences of the women and the men at home, the allies and the other nations, and here on the Pacific Front, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Leading this great nation into a battle, into a war on a global scale that, frankly, President Roosevelt did not want to be a part of. And the Americans, which had a history of not engaging in foreign wars ever since George Washington, had sought to keep the country out of political entanglements and allies to remain free. Now, there was American involvement in World War I. Woodrow Wilson also sought to keep the Americans out of World War I, but as it began to affect the American economy, it became vitally necessary that he maintain American economic independence by maintaining free lines of economic. Getting ready. We're all getting ready, aren't we? Yes. Yeah, every now and then you run into some folks with similar plans. So World War II was obviously not the first endeavor of American and global war. The World War I effort proved. But the American involvement in World War I was relatively small, significantly smaller than the French and British involvement and the other Western allies. But Franklin Roosevelt didn't want to be involved in this war. But after the attack on Pearl Harbor, it became necessary. But right over here, and there's a second one, just directly on the opposite side. Kilroy was here. Who was Kilroy, you ask? Well, it was a little cartoon. There's a little cartoon that made its way throughout the entirety of the war front. So whether it was military inspectors or just other administrative individuals going around. Every now and then you'll find these little etchings. You'll find these little etchings in naval ships, bases, the sides of jeeps, or on a tree, whatever. Just something that the troops would find to help keep their own sanity, and their own amusement, their own humor, their own humanity through the horrors of war. Little nods to the different aspects of life, of the war effort and life of the war overseas. And that's one of the things I greatly appreciate about that World War II memorial. It was designed with an eye and an ear toward so many aspects of the war, not just hey, here was this what happened, but here was the lovely reflecting pool. Like the Tidal Basin, the reflecting pool is not very large, not very deep. As a matter of fact, from time to time, they will drain the reflecting pool to kind of clean out some of the floor bed of some of the gunk that arrives down that way. So before we head on down, we're going to swing on down this way. Every now and then we may stop to get a drink. It's not super hot. It's not super humid, but the sun is out. We're trying to stay in the shade. But always make sure that you stay hydrated, especially if you're out here in the middle of the day. Especially if you're out in the middle of the summer. So, as we come around, every now and then when you're walking around the National Mall area, restrooms and water fountains can be hard to come across. Or sometimes you don't always see them. But there is one right here on the back side of the World War II Memorial. So there's the Washington Monument, John Paul Jones, not quite James Earl Jones. Restrooms are right here. So, that's where restrooms are. I'm gonna stop to get myself a drink. Give you all a nice little view of the Washington Monument. Right there. All right. So we come on back. As I said, a lot of green space over here. All of this is still the National Mall. You can't even see the reflecting pool. We're going to come on down another columned monument here. In a nice, calm, easy stroll. Try to stay in some shade the best that we can. Now, we just left the World War II Memorial. There is a new memorial to World War I, but that is not on the National Mall. So we're not going to get to that today. But this here is the DC War Memorial. There's some more restrooms right over here. The DC War Memorial is dedicated by the District of Columbia for those DC citizens, those DC residents who fought in World War I. So this was erected in honor of the soldiers who fought in World War I from the city itself. Fought in the World War. Gives you an idea too as to when it was erected. Calling it the World War. This was erected before World War II broke out. Horse stables. Going to have some horses here to your left. Don't always think about horses being here in the National Mall, but mounted police, National Park, horse stables right here. Obviously they have names. I don't know what their names are. Gabe, do you want a horse?
No, I'm good.
You're good?
Yeah.
Would you like to ride horses?
Probably not.
No? In the Thor movie, Thor wanted a horse. He walked into a pet shop looking for a horse. The semi-quincentennial. 250 years. Quincentennial being 500 years, semi being half of that, so 250 years, the semi-quincentennial. The United States Park Police.
And that looks like a great place for some air conditioning.
It does look like a great place for some air conditioning.
I could really
And Gabe,
go for some air conditioning.
you can. You're more than welcome to go for some air conditioning. You'll know where to catch up with me.
Okay.
Because you can find me on the stream.
I will.
All right.
I'll find my way back home.
Yep, you do that. Well, we just lost Gabe to the to the allures of air conditioning. But that's quite all right. It's a hot day. Well, I just take it. It's hot for Gabe. Gabe's feeling pretty warm today. And so, again, just a reminder, always make sure that you take care of yourself. No matter where you are, if you're in DC, if you're exploring any other city, there's always going to be a desire to try to get as much done as you possibly can. And trust me, I've made those mistakes myself. Sometimes I'm accused, and probably rightfully so, of still trying to do that. But you always have to account for other people's needs and how to pace out your day. The National Mall is long, I've said it. And then when you get to museums are often, they're open from 10 to 5:30, and there is so much in these museums that, you know, for people like me, I am fascinated by so many different topics and subjects and ideas. I could spend hours and hours and hours in each of these museums just to look at all of the different artifacts. You do that, you could spend an entire day in a singular museum. But you try to do 2 museums in a day, and that's probably really the most that you can do. They close at 5:30. The Smithsonian ones, they're usually not open any longer than that. Yeah, they are free admission, of course, the Smithsonian museums. Not all museums in DC are Smithsonian museums. Not all of them are public. Not all of them are free. Some of them do have later hours. So do your research, do your homework ahead of time if you do want to do that. But many of the ones that, some of them are near the National Mall, others are not. But remember for how to pace out your day. Just because there are museums and monuments all in this one area of the National Mall does not make it to where you can do it all in one day. But as we come across Lincoln, we're got a pit stop before we get to Lincoln. And I'm coming around the long way to it, because this is how the memorial itself was designed. A little easier to do this than it was for FDR. But we're coming up on the Korean War, a forgotten war. We had George Mason as the forgotten father. The Korean War is often the forgotten war. And that because, not because it wasn't significant, and not because there wasn't a large effort to it, but simply because it's between 2 major events in the American psyche: World War II and Vietnam. Korea is in the same type of domino effect, if you would, to use Eisenhower's terms about the dominoes that fall, as Vietnam. The idea of halting the spread of communism while we worked with the Soviets in World War II against what was deemed greater evils of Germany and Japan, then at the same time felt the need to halt the spread of communism through American strength for the Koreans and the Vietnamese, which the Americans helped liberate from the Japanese Empire. So the idea is liberating these peoples from the Japanese Empire and then turning around to have them conquered again or influenced by the communist Soviets. Again, another totalitarian regime. That just doesn't sit well with the leaders of freedom. But without further allies in a global effort, Americans were caught fighting in unfamiliar areas. Obviously, the Americans were not the only ones here fighting. They did have assistance. It was slightly different. The soldiers walking through the fields of Korea. But often those who fought in Korea were forgotten about. Because by the time they came home, the 60s had social unrest. The 60s had so many individuals with a televised war dealing with Vietnam that Korea gets forgotten about.
Is this real wish pool? Yeah, but the window.
The United Nations, relatively new after World War II, and the individuals who gave the last full measure of devotion in defense of freedom. American and Koreans. Fighting together. To halt the spread of communism throughout the entirety of the Korean Peninsula. Now, it was agreed upon after World War II, just as Berlin was split, Germany was split, Korea would be split, or Vietnam would be split. But then how those nations would aggressively seek to reconquer the rest of their divided nation into a unified nation under communist rule in both locations. All of these names. So if you know of anybody in your family who was involved in the Korean conflict, stop by, remember them. Remember those who they fought with, who they fought alongside, far away from their own country. Those they were trying to help liberate. An extension of World War II, an extension of that greatest generation. But yes, we often forget about it. Now, what I personally appreciate about this memorial is the fact that it's, along with Vietnam, and frankly along with World War II, it's an educational driver for me personally. And that's another thing about these monuments and memorials and the museums that I think are important for all of us. Me personally, I'm much more of a Revolutionary era, early Republic era, when it comes to my first love, if you would, of American history. It's extended into pre-Civil War, and a lot of the times where we're able to go to Civil War sites or to Civil War type museums or exhibits, that is something that for me, it's a little, it's extra educational for me as well. And through that, I've been able to develop a greater knowledge and a greater understanding and a greater appreciation of the people involved, the places that are involved. Find a nice shady spot here. And that's where, Korea and Vietnam and even World War II, for me, those were not always what had interested me educationally. But then going to these, it helps you recognize and it helps you remember, these are all people too, humans, and the world continues. And as the world continues and as wars continue, these are all humans. They're people with families and people with homes who lived in their own culture on their own times. And to think about those people that were taken away from their homes and their cultures and their communities, their workplaces, and their families to go fight somewhere else, or because their homes, their workplaces were being threatened by outside groups. And so if any of you, have relatives, ancestors, parents, grandparents who were involved in the Korean War effort, who were involved in World War II, let us know. Drop them in the comments, whether you're here live or not. Drop them in the comments as a remembrance, as a reminder as to who they were, where they fought, their rank if you knew them. Because ultimately that's what all of these are. These are memorials. We need to sometimes remember that, yes, they're tourist attractions, because that's what a lot of DC is. They're memorials that have become maybe tourist attractions. So people see them to see them. But let's take a moment out to remember everything about why they're being memorialized. Why the actions or the events are getting memorialized. And everything about them. The good, the bad, the ugly. So that we can look at history. Look at the history that was there. And maybe try to prevent some of the things that we can try to prevent. If we look at history, we look at things going on now, and we say, hey, this type of thing happened before because of some similar decisions that are being made now. What can we learn about, or how can we maybe alter so we don't make mistakes, or we do better than mistakes that were made before? So, anyway, those are some of the ways that these types of memorials and monuments can help us look back at history. And it's not about politics. It really isn't about politics. But when we live in such a politically divisive world, remember that people are people, and people are human beings with their own humanity and with their own families. And with that, we can look at the history and look to see what happened as a result, and then see if we can match what happened then with what is happening now, good, bad, or ugly, and then move forward. Now, as I said, ready for the semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of July 4th. So here we are at the Lincoln Memorial. They are in the process of constructing a museum underneath the Lincoln Memorial, which I cannot wait to see. Right across from the Tidal Basin, or not the Tidal Basin, the reflecting pool, I'm sorry. We have the Washington Monument, and what you can barely see behind the Washington Monument is the Capitol building. Again, the east-west orientation. The east-west orientation of the National Mall. But we'll go up Lincoln Memorial. But they're building a museum. They have temporary ramp to go up to the Lincoln Memorial statue. As I said, I am taking you on a leisurely stroll through the National Mall. I am not going to treat the Lincoln Memorial steps like the Rocky Steps. No siree. But here at the top of the Lincoln Memorial are the states. The states of the Union and the year of their admission to the Union. But as I said, I cannot wait until that museum is done. Now, I'll give it some time, obviously, to settle down, because of the 250th anniversary of the 4th of July, the Declaration of Independence and American independence from Britain, is going to be a busy, busy, busy time. Not only in D.C., but also in Boston and in Philadelphia. So if you're planning on visiting, I would recommend it, because it would be a once-in-a-lifetime event and memory. But also, similarly, there will be lots of crowds. And the crowds here are also going to be pretty darn big. And with the new museum, those crowds might continue to linger. But I'll check that out someday. Bring you along. Again, one of the benefits of coming along in the morning, these crowds are not going to be nearly as big. There's Abe. When you come for cherry blossom season, this place is packed. Fourscore 7 years ago, the Gettysburg Address. That was the entirety of the Gettysburg Address. Just a short 200 some odd word address for the Gettysburg Address. That's all it was. He actually came after a 2-hour long speech by prominent orator. And everybody came out for that speech. It just so happened to be that President Lincoln was there giving closing remarks, and it was the Gettysburg Address, and that was what was remembered. His second inaugural address. This is Abe Lincoln. A very, very large and imposing monument, staring down through the Washington Monument toward the U.S. Capitol building, keeping this nation together. Abraham Lincoln, a fascinating aspect of American history, a fascinating person with a background. We all know his story of being on the frontier, just a little boy living in a log cabin, woods, educating himself. But you don't just become president just by deciding to be president. You gotta going through law, going through other government offices to become versed in government and politics before successfully running for president. Actually, as a matter of fact, when Lincoln won, he was the first Republican. The Republican Party was new. The Republican Party had run on a very abolitionist platform to end slavery. But there were 4 different candidates for president. So the vote was split 4 different ways. At that point, the nation had become so fractured that there was the new Republican Party, there was the old Democratic Party, there were Northern Democrats, Southern Democrats, who had different views about slavery, but then some other views that were familiar and similar to the other Democratic views, just not from a slavery perspective. So, but the Republican Party and Lincoln won, and as soon as he won, that was when the Civil War began. But he won, and when the Civil War was his attempt, it was the American attempt, the Union Army's attempt to keep the Southern states as part of the Union, to keep the Union together. Slavery itself was not necessarily an immediate thought in the purposes of the war. As a matter of fact, the Union had to fight aggressively into the South in order to keep the Confederate states and to quell their rebellion, as opposed to the Confederates launching an offensive into the North. They eventually did, to try to demonstrate that they were strong enough and to decrease the morale of the Union cause. But shortly after the Battle of Antietam is when Lincoln issued his Emancipation Proclamation. Really, at that point, bringing slavery into the forefront as an issue for the war. The Emancipation Proclamation wasn't perfect. It was not a wholesale, everybody is free now. But that brought the moral compass and moral issue of slavery into the war. And from there, the Confederates lost all hope for European assistance to split up the economic empire of the United States. And the Confederates lost the support of some others where slavery may have been a fence issue. So at that point, the Union War, it wasn't Antietam wasn't the final turning point from a battle standpoint. That would have been Gettysburg. But the Americans obviously, eventually, the Union won the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln had also suspended some civil liberties. So it was not all perfect. For him, it was doing everything he needed to do to make sure that the Union stayed together. So again, a question as to what rights get suspended for what purpose, and is it a good purpose or not, a just purpose? I'll leave that up for you to decide. But The Civil War was ended at Appomattox, Virginia, when General Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant. But it was only 12 days after that when John Wilkes Booth shot Abraham Lincoln at the Ford Theater, just up the road here in Washington, D.C., assassinating Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth then jumped down, broke his leg. His leg was then set by Dr. Samuel Mudd. John Wilkes Booth, the other conspirators in that assassination of Lincoln, and Samuel Mudd were then imprisoned at Fort Jefferson in what is now Dry Tortugas National Park, 70 miles west of Key West, at Fort Jefferson on an island in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. We'll have a video of that coming up in a few weeks. But Abraham Lincoln, to keep the nation together, largely considered one of, at the very least, top 3 presidents in American history.
I got bound on this. I got bound on this.
Confined names. Names of the fallen from 1959 to 1975 of those who fought in Vietnam. This is the Vietnam Wall coming up. Equidistant from Lincoln on the other side from the Korean Memorial. The Soldiers Monument, the 3 Soldiers Monument, representing soldiers of all types amongst all Americans, across nationalities and ethnicities, fighting as brothers in arms in a countryside, in a nation that they were not familiar with. Many of them became disillusioned with the war itself and the political reasons behind the war as they were drafted away from their families, away from their homes, and sent to fight in a war. But then this was also 15 to 20 years after World War II. 15 to 20 to 25 years after the ideals of that greatest generation who fought in World War II. So ideas change as society changes. So while those in charge may have had the same ideas of expanding freedom, of protecting freedom in particular locations, those who were sent to fight were products of a different generation. And neither right, wrong, or indifferent, or good, bad, or ugly, things change with time, and people change with time, ideas change with time. I do not have anybody who was involved in Vietnam that I am personally familiar with. But all of these people were humans. Humans with their own families. Humans with their own goals, their own dreams. And as such, we should remember them all as best we can. When they were kids, they had dreams of growing up to be a baseball star, a doctor, dreams of becoming a farmer, whatever they wanted to do. And their lives were cut short. In this case, fighting for the freedoms of others. And as history moves on, sadly, more and more memories from Vietnam will be lost. Of a war fought between 1959 and 1975. We're now 50 years beyond Vietnam. Some of those drafted when they were 18, 19, 20. And that generation will eventually soon be gone as well. Now we're going to take a little detour off the National Mall officially. It's not a very long detour, but that's where we're headed. We're going to move away from politics, but not moving away from history. And actually, as a matter of fact, this individual was so influential in so many different aspects of our understanding of our place in the universe. But he was also, then directly influential for the outcomes of World War II, and then how the Cold War would play out. The Cold War through the wars in Korea and Vietnam, the Cuban Missile Crisis, Soviet aggression. And that was through nuclear science. So, without this particular individual, who knows what the world would look like. And that's where we're headed next. I'm going to head on over toward the National Academy of Science, which is literally just right across the street on the northern side of the National Mall by Lincoln and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Well, we just missed the light, but that's all right. That gives us a chance to stay here for a little bit, catch our breath, lean on a pole. All right, what does this say? Wait. I gotta say, my favorite crosswalks I've ever seen or ever encountered was in Dublin. Dublin, Ireland. You hit the crosswalk, and when it's ready to go, it's got a choo sound, and it starts. It gives you the sound effects to let you know it's kind of to get going. It's really kind of cool. Every now and then, you'll get some cities that give you a whole spiel about what place you're crossing and how much time you have left, and I just like something short and sweet. Got a nice cool breeze coming through a little bit.
I hope you're going to take in the Einstein statue.
That's exactly where I'm going. All right.
Okay, that's across.
We got 22 seconds. I think I can make it across. So as we come across to the National Academy of Science, that's exactly who I was talking about. So we got Mr. Albert Einstein coming up. As I said, without him, who knows what the world would be like. Not only our understanding of general relativity and science and everything, but without his work on nuclear energy, then the development of atomic weaponry, how that would have affected either World War II, but also then the Cold War, Korea, Vietnam, Cuban Missile Crisis, all of that, and where we would be today. Who knows? Again, good, bad, or ugly with nuclear energy. But this is Albert Einstein coming up. And again, Albert Einstein See, Albert Einstein was during this time where we have this understanding of quantum physics and quantum mechanics, where things at really, really, really small scales are random, but then far away they seem like they're entangled with some forces that, how in the world do they exist? We have no idea. To this day, actually, we don't really know. There are things called philosophy of science and philosophy of physics and philosophy of quantum physics, which is not really about the data itself, but how we think about and interpret the data. So those types of things should not be forgotten about. But Albert Einstein, he was during this time where he didn't feel that God would play dice with the universe. And he, similar to Jefferson in a way, it was much more of a deist idea, not a Christian or theist idea of God, but more of God being just whatever that prime mover of the universe was. But he had issues with quantum physics for how it was being interpreted. But other than that, there was a very, very strong connection with our understanding of the universe through the work of Isaac Newton, Newtonian mechanics, which builds off of the work of Galileo and all of that, of forces, equal opposite reactions, all of that type of thing that we know about. But couldn't quite exactly figure out how gravity and time and all of that would seem to work. He had a few issues with Newton in terms of the observations that didn't quite fully calculate without some type of weird adjustments. Now, Einstein made his mistakes, no doubt, but he also, one of those mistakes being the idea of a cosmological constant for the expansion of the universe, that it was just some type of constant expansion, that number that he just put in to make his formulas work. Later on, I think he said that was quite the blunder. But so what he did in regards to Newton and gravity and all of that, he couldn't quite get it to figure out. So he just said, well, wait a minute. What if we're just looking at this the wrong way? So he reformulated how we look at things, and that's how he got special relativity and general relativity, of the idea of space and time working together as one cohesive unit. And then as that takes place, eventually those observations can be made that confirm his theories. Observations with black holes, with light, how gravity bends light. So is gravity a force, or is gravity part of the fabric of space-time? Some of these things are long outside my pay grade, my understanding, but they're still fascinating, and I still love to learn more and more about those types of things. But Einstein is just an example, again, of people, if you don't always have the answers, maybe if you just change your reference frame, looking through the lens or the shoes of from some other perspective can provide some answers, or can provide some insight into something that maybe we've just kind of been blinded to because we never thought about it. And that is what Einstein is ultimately part of his genius. Yes, he had an amazing IQ. And actually, if you go to the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, you'll be able to see slides of pieces of Einstein's brain. They are on display for you to see. Now, the Mutter Museum, if you go there, just to give you a heads up, there can be very disturbing things to see. When that museum was created, the idea of research, of medical research, was different. So there are a lot of actual human skulls and remnants from deaths of human disabilities, from the birth canal, and all sorts of things that can be considered disturbing. So you can't photo or video inside there, but we took a visit there in Philadelphia. But you can see slides of pieces of Einstein's brain that were in there as well. And with that, they were able to demonstrate that there were parts of Einstein's brain that were just different. than the average brain. But regardless of all of that, it was the idea of, let's look at this thing a little bit different, and maybe we can find answers. And then eventually those answers came, some within his lifetime, but most of them outside of his lifetime. And that's how science works. Science can get things wrong, no doubt. But when science can be confirmed years, decades, or even centuries later. Now, I say all of that but at the same time, we want to make sure that we know that science is limited to the natural world. So science cannot answer questions that don't solely involve the natural realm. Now, if you have questions as to, or beliefs that the natural realm is all that there is and everything is the natural realm, then your answer to those questions may be different from someone else who believes otherwise, or has philosophies that there is more than just the physical or natural realm. But that was our quick little detour off the National Mall. And now we're back. Tour bus. Caught in the middle there. That's all right. We're going to head past the Vietnam Memorial. I know. You guys didn't come here to hear all of my thoughts about all sorts of different things, or maybe you did. I don't know. I give myself too much credit sometimes. But again, memorials and monuments are there to, yes, memorialize something. Why are they memorialized? And what questions does that bring about? And how should that inspire us to act or to think in one way or another way? So then you're going to encounter, and we all know, we're going to encounter monuments at some point, or memorials at some place, at some location of somebody who has done things that we can all agree are morally wrong. Committed genocides, whatever the case may be. So then how do we handle those monuments? Nationwide, we've had this discussion. But how do you handle those monuments? Why is the monument there to begin with? Do we then put up additional educational things to address the uglies of that memorial and of why it's there? Or do we do that to basically change why it's still standing? It's still standing, whereas before we were honoring this, and now we use this to remember those that were victims of this individual. I don't know. Do we take them down because too many people feel that it's a memorialization, that anybody who has a monument to them automatically is good? Is that what it is? Or do we take them down but then keep them up in some type of museum structure? All of these different things. And again, going back to Einstein, these are questions about what if we think differently? Can we go about this a different way than the way that we've seen it? Does it always have to be either or? Can it be both and? Can there be a middle ground? Or maybe not a middle ground, but an overarching picture that comprises a Venn diagram, if you would, of multiple views together. Those are hard conversations. But anyway, we're here for a leisurely stroll. And if you haven't noticed, I will go off on tangents. But we have all of this green space. This is a forgotten area of the National Mall. Vietnam Memorial is down that way. Lincoln is over there. The reflecting pool is over there. You cannot see it from here. But this is all part of the National Mall. And this is another wonderful quiet space. Relatively quiet, yes. You got the sound of the cars. But we got a pond as we come across what is known as Constitution Gardens. Every now and then this pond will need to be drained too. As we get closer, you'll see algae, other things. Not a whole lot of people down this area. So if you're looking for a place to kind of get away from the crowds, Constitution Gardens is a good place for it. I'm going to leave you right here for just a minute. All right. come back around the the pond at Constitution Gardens with some ducks. You sure you guys want to dive into that thing? All right, I guess you do. I wouldn't. But then again, I'm not a duck. Very calm and peaceful. Munching. Snack time for the ducks. Our next memorial is right around the corner. Another memorial that doesn't get nearly as much love as I think it should. Now, that being said, I think this memorial is in need of some TLC. I also am not an expert on my ornithology. I don't know what kind of birds things are all the time. What is this guy? I get a reflection coming back at me at the screen, so I hope you guys can see him. But what is this guy? I don't know what that guy is. But this pond is also not very deep at all. You can see, I don't know if you can see or not, but through there. But our next memorial is a memorial to the 56 signers of the Constitution. It's on this lovely pond, and very few people come down this way. I said the Constitution. I meant the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. So this was actually gifted by the Bicentennial Administration of 1976. So this memorial is less than 50 years old. It's not falling apart, but not too many people come here, and it's on this island, but there's really not much you can't really sit, there's no benches around. But as you come through, some of these bricks are coming out. But we the people, Independence Hall, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. You have the names, the occupations, the locations, and the signatures of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Those who admittedly committed treason. By putting their names to this. Now, these are marked by state from where they were from. Benjamin Rush, George Taylor, Benjamin Franklin, James Wilson, from Pennsylvania. 3 delegates from Delaware. The 4, including Samuel Chase, from Maryland, all from their states. Virginia, the 7 delegates from Virginia. Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Nelson, Carter Braxton. Some of these are names that you don't really know. Most of these are names that have fallen out from history. So it's good to remember these names and who they were, because themselves as names that we don't remember, they are reminders that you can be part of something special without being remembered forever, and that you could take inspiration knowing that you can do things, and maybe someone will remember it someday, maybe not. But these individuals put their names where their mouth was. Elbridge Gerry, John Adams, Samuel Adams, Robert Payne, John Hancock from Massachusetts. And then those from New Hampshire. The 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. And again, the Revolutionary era had its hotbeds, of course. Philadelphia, New York, Boston, Virginia. But there were places like Georgia, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, New Jersey, the frontier of the Carolinas. And Virginia at that point also included what is now known as West Virginia. So all of that West Virginia countryside, all of those individuals. Where were they from? They had lives. They had lives, they had jobs. But then, you know, they decided, we're going to put our name to this because this is what we believe in. In the midst of a revolutionary movement that was not unanimous, there were many, many, many people who believed firmly that armed revolution was not the answer. They believed firmly that King George was in the right. Some of them stayed, some of them moved away. So now, 249 years later, 250 years later, we look back and we think, oh, this was this grand movement where all of these people in all of these colonies decided to revolt against the British Crown. Well, that's not the truth at all. And so we can take that information and we can apply that to today. People are going to disagree. And sometimes it takes society as a whole a lot longer than we would like for what we think right to be to prevail, for justice to prevail, or for mercy to prevail, or for the combination of justice and mercy to prevail. But humans are flawed individuals. Humans were flawed individuals. We continue to be flawed individuals because we're not perfect. But so long as we treat each other with dignity and love and care for our fellow human beings, allow for our fellow human beings to be treated fairly and push for them to be treated fairly, I think we all move toward the right way, toward the right direction. So we've finished our western end. We're going to head toward the east of the National Mall. You'll notice most of the memorials are on that western end. You'll hit some museums here on the east,